Welcome back to Devtoberfest and welcome back to our day about SAP WorkZone. I'm Dan Robleski. I'm your developer advocate for low-code and no-code solutions. About an hour ago, we heard Florian and Yumna talk about WorkZone and give an introduction to what that's all about and how to create them. And now we're going to go a little bit more in depth about how to bring the business data into the work zones so users can see it without actually having to go into the applications. Before I do that, I just want to go over the schedule for today. Later today, Rupam will be here to expand on what we hear today about the integration cards and how to make them even smarter, how to make them work together, to update based on other cards that you create, how to have them reflect the locale and other things like that. And then he'll be back about especially for developers how to customize work zones, how to build widgets, how to provide things to business users so they can add them to their work zones. So now I want to hand it over to Yumna and Florian. Go ahead.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks again. Thanks, Daniel. And thanks for everyone joining us today. Good morning or good day from wherever you're joining us from. I'm here with my colleague Yumna. We're both from the product management team in the area of business technology platform, focusing on digital experience, representing both product development and product communication enablement here. And we're really happy to be here today. So I think without further ado, following up on the session that you've just heard about, in case you joined us, let's take it away to learn more about in depth how you bring business data into WorkZone and how that actually goes. So you should be seeing my screen now, or specifically the slides. So I said follow up, bring your business data, and thank you for that. Alrighty, so quick look at the agenda. I'm gonna do a really super short recap of WorkZone as a high-level product, and more importantly, how it fits into the overall BTP stack, architecturally speaking. And then we'll quickly talk about what are some typical motivations for why you would even want to bring business data or in general have extensibility options in WorkZone. And then we'll talk specifically about how you actually go about doing that in the context of, specifically now, UI integration cards, including a live end-to-end building of such a card, deploying it into WorkZone, which you'll see towards the end. Right. So let's take it away and jump in. Like I said, recapping quickly, WorkZone as a product and positioning. Just you'll see more about this in the demo, of course, but just in a nutshell, you see on the right-hand side of the slide, you see depicted what WorkZone can look and feel like. Ultimately, we position it as a digital experience solution. So really an ability for you, or a tool for you, to create these different engaging, we call them business sites or homepages, workspaces, and other entities, where you can combine different types of content, be it, learn more about application data, but other forms of content, web content, multimedia, unstructured, structured information. And it really then empowers the different users to create these different guided or engaging experiences across the tool. Fundamentally, that's what WorkZone is positioned at, and it brings in a number of capabilities that you also know from other services, specifically the Launchpad service. So it's sort of presenting that as a sort of superset of capabilities in the area of creating such a centralized entry point across SAP. That's all about recap. Let's dive into solution architecture, or rather a solution diagram, to help you understand how WorkZone fits into the overall BTP or the business technology platform stack and related components, because this will be the foundation for today's session, as well as my session, as well as the session coming up from Rupam, because we're going to tap into a number of those BTP services for connecting to different systems and servicing business data. So in a nutshell, what you need to take away from this slide are the following aspects. So number one, center stage of this screen is, of course, WorkZone as a service. WorkZone as a service is offered exclusively on the business technology platform, specifically on the multi-cloud Cloud Foundry environment. So this is number one. As a consequence, it ties into or leverages connectivity framework to easily and securely connect to cloud and on-prem, as well as third-party solutions. You see that depicted on the right-hand side of the slide, and it taps into a number of BTP services. For instance, on the bottom side of the slide, it taps into the identity service, so SAP Cloud Identity Services for handling single sign-on, user provisioning, user lifecycle, as well as on the top left-hand side, for instance, you'll see that in my demo as well, and in Rupam's demos, for instance, the Business Application Studio, to create those different extensions and then directly deploy them into WorkZone. And of course, WorkZone as a service in itself brings in a number of, you could say, microservices that are sort of combined into a unified offering. Ultimately, that's what WorkZone is about, and what you would have seen in the previous session and what you'll see in my demo as well. Right, so enough about architecture and positioning of the product. Let's talk about the why of why you would actually create such extensions. And again, there's of course a number of scenarios where bringing business data, creating extensibility options in general is beneficial, but we want to highlight a few to really help drive home the point of what you're going to see, or why you want to do the things that you're going to see throughout the upcoming 3 sessions. Number one, you want to, of course, surface, and this is going to be front and center of this session, you want to surface business data from SAP or third-party systems. Secondly, you may want to modify the overall user interface, adding menu items, deep links, some other things. So that could be an option for extensibility or motivation for it. You may want to extract different data out of WorkZone into an external tool for enterprise-wide searching, additional analytical capabilities, or some other scenarios. Next, you may want to truly harmonize the experience a user has across a dedicated business process that may touch multiple systems. More to that on the next slide. And lastly, of course, a usual area, you may want to automate certain elements or certain approaches. For instance, importing data from a legacy system during the migration project or an implementation project. So this is another angle of where this can help.
Exciting, Florian. Thank you for sharing all these amazing different use cases and scenarios for extensibility. So would you mind sharing also some of which product capabilities and tools does SAP WorkZone provide?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So how do we realize those, I guess, is the point. So great. So in a nutshell, there's just a couple, and again, live demo will follow accordingly. There's a couple building blocks that are available in WorkZone that make it, in addition to the out-of-the-box capabilities that the business users and every user can use, that make it an extremely powerful platform, which can go a really long way and leverage a number of scenarios. So number one, and that's going to be center important also for today, the concept of UI integration cards. And those are essentially sort of micro applications. You would build them in Business Application Studio. Secondly, you can of course build workflows using process automation as an example. And if you take also today workflow management, if you take UI integration cards and workflows and you combine them, you get to a concept that we call a guided experience, which is basically guiding the user through a potentially multi-step system process. For instance, them applying for parental leave, that may be requiring them to apply for different elements, different processes, upload different data to different systems, and you can give them a unified experience for this entire process in such a guided experience. And as the name suggests, it guides them through this process. You can, of course, build a custom version of the mobile app or other mobile apps using our powerful mobile services capability. You can use the shell plugin concept to modify the overall global header and user menu experience in WorkZone. It's a concept you may also know from other tools like Launchpad Service. And of course, again, more to that also in another session from Rupam. You can then even tap into a broad range of mostly OData APIs and webhook subscriptions to pull and push data in or out of the system, WorkZone specifically for the mentioned scenarios.
So that now that we know about the range of extensibility options, as the session title suggests, should we jump into exploring the aspects of bringing business applications data into WorkZone? Absolutely,
yeah, happy to do exactly that. So let's talk about what are the different options of getting business data into the system. And as you may be a bit surprised, not all options of bringing business data into the system itself immediately require you to create such a UI integration card or UI integration card. Fundamentally, there are three main types of ways to get business data into the system. There is the first way, which I'm going to cover only very briefly because Yumna already did a fantastic demo of this just some minutes ago. It's a broad collection of mostly pre-built widgets. So it's a catalog where you can bring in a number of different data into the work zone experience across the different building blocks to surface any number of criteria, self-service guides, policies, procedures, anything related to business processes and data you can surface using that. Secondly, you can of course tie into existing different apps that or Fiori apps that you may have deployed, for instance, in your S/4HANA or in your SAP integrated business planning solution. So you can tap into those different business data from those different transactions by integrating the individual apps and then launching them directly within WorkZone. And of course, you can see cards already sort of previewed here on this slide. And then pillar number 3, and that's going to be the start of today, UI integration cards themselves. And you can see some examples here on the right-hand side, but let me quickly explain for those of you who are not familiar with the concept of UI integration card, what those are. You can sort of see what they can and look like on the right-hand side, at least some examples, but let's quickly recap. Number 1, they are, as you can see here, sort of small building blocks that can consolidate data from one or multiple different backend systems into a micro app experience. They come with different visualization options for that matter. They can be in the form of declarative cards, so really a more of a low code or no code experience. In our hands, really easy and to create and consume. And you can basically add them across the different areas of WorkZone. And so that's in a nutshell what cards are. And if you then see this, Business Application Studio, which I'm going to use for actually developing one and deploying it into WorkZone, has a number of those cards available as templates. It has a pre-built set of extensibility or developer tools available, baked into it, and then you can just make use of that for creating them. So how do we go about just doing exactly that? Quickly showing you what I have done in preparation, so to make the demo efficient. So in case you want to follow along, this is what you would need to do then. You would firstly go into your Business Application Studio and set up a developer space or a dev space. You can see highlighted on this screen, there's a dedicated extension, an SAP build extension for SAP WorkZone that brings in a number of relevant developer tools for Business Application Studio in the focus of WorkZone. So you want to make sure you check this nice, cute little octopus there and make sure this is enabled, number 1. And number 2, make sure you have, or you then create a project. You can either use the wizard, which I'm going to do, or of course also clone from a Git repository as an example.
So with the development environment being prepared, what would you say would be like the first good and simple extension that can be created?
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. So we would want to start with a simple card in the sense that before doing that, we need to understand, well, what are the key building blocks of a card when creating it, and how do you actually make use of it? And then I'm going to show the same thing in a live coding as well. So if you look at the card or the Business Application Studio environment, you basically are going to be seeing first and foremost a file called manifest.json. This is front and center and critically important for the card. And you basically have 2 ways of interacting with this manifest.json file. On the left-hand side, you can see there's a code editor, so you can edit the raw JSON, or you also have a true no-code experience by, as you can see on the right-hand side, sort of a visual editor that just allows you to configure it rather than having to deal with the JSON coding on the left-hand side. And then knowing this, we can explore a bit further what different areas or what type of cards you can actually create. And I want to show basically 2 extremes on this slide here. On the left-hand side, it's truly a low-code, almost a no-code experience in the sense that you create this manifest.json file. It's a declarative card, and that's all it is. There is nothing complicated, no complicated business logic to it, but it already goes a long way, and it shows some a nice visualization based on the card framework of the relevant business data. And you can make use of this in WorkZone immediately. So this is more sort of the lightweight, simple approach. And then if you want to go, as you can already see from the project structure, the more complex route, more powerful at the same time, you can also build a more complex component card that basically then takes in in UI5 code rather than just modifying the manifest JSON file on the left-hand side. And this basically then gives you the fullest flexibility. But of course, it also increases complexity when creating this card. But again, more about these special types and going even beyond sort of a simple card will also then be covered in our upcoming sessions later today or tonight, I guess. And of course, whatever you do, you always have a nice option in Business Application Studio, which allow you to preview what you're actually going to be working on. And again, I'm going to show that live as well.
So how can these UI integration cards connect to business applications then?
That's a great question. Yeah. So because so far, all I've talked about was creating these cards and somehow getting them into Workzone. But how does a card, for instance, connect to my SuccessFactors or S/4HANA system, you may ask? And that's exactly what I'm going to be covering as basically the last couple of slides before moving into this live demo. So in a nutshell, the UI cards, Business Application Studio as a whole, and Workzone also tap into, as I alluded to on my introduction slide, tap into the connectivity layer of the BTP of the sub account. So you can make use of, to be very specific, these connectivity destinations in the card itself. And you want to make sure that you maintain this specific property highlighted here on this screen. And then this destination can be used on the card itself is used in the card to ensure a direct connection to the backend system. So you don't have to deal with like how do you securely connect based on, for instance, I don't know, an OAuth 2 connection to a backend. The destination will of course take care of that for you. And all you need to do in developing the card and when using it in Workzone is you need to tell to this card and Workzone to use this destination, and then everything else is handled via that. So this is very powerful, and you can see this also depicted here in a real example. You can see here on the left-hand side highlighted. You can see the destination is being referenced here in the card manifest JSON file, and this then refers to a dedicated destination on the sub account where this Business Application Studio is running, where you're building the card, and more importantly, where the Workzone is then running. And if you look then in the Workzone side of things, you then again see how the card references that same or whatever you call the destination, and so that the card at runtime is able to pull the data. And that is very important because it's doing so then on, for instance, on behalf of the logged in user. So it can handle all the propagation of the identity so that the user, again, using the example of SuccessFactors, for example, is presented with their own employee profile, with their own learning history, and whatever other elements you want to show.
So, and then when we have all of this in place, how can business users get access to the cards in their Workzone experience?
Absolutely, yeah. So now we've built all of this. How do we make it available? Exactly, that's the last item to ask. And essentially, there's two options that you have. And the simplest option is literally downloading and uploading the card to Workzone. We basically have, with Business Application Studio, you can basically get a zip archive that you can extract and then upload in the administration console. Or alternatively, the latter is what I'm going to use in a minute. You can deploy directly from Business Application Studio into your Workzone environment. Now that you have the card, you may ask him, I may have many cards. So how can I package this efficiently? And I may have other entities of extensibility that I want to package as well. That's where the area of content packages, just to briefly touch on them, also come in here. And essentially the content package is a very similar mechanism. You can also create that in Business Application Studio. You'll see this also in my demo. I'm not going to go through it, but you'll see it in the screen essentially. So you can create a content package, which, as the name suggests, packages different entities, for instance, multiple cards into a single package. And then instead of deploying and updating individual cards, you can have an entire package. For instance, as a partner solution, or SAP also provides content packages for different scenarios. And then you can automatically install the entire package with all the content in it. So multiple cards as an example. And then updating the version of the content package will update all the cards. So this is a more, I guess, comprehensive approach of doing that. But of course, for creating a simple card, you don't necessarily need a content package. But the more cards and scenarios you have, the more efficient it will become using a content package, of course. And then basically in the work zone experience itself, you can then take a number of different actions with the cards once they're in the system. Because you may want to say, well, who should be able to see a certain card? How can you configure it? So those are different options that, again, you have then once the card is made available in the system itself.
Thanks for sharing all this exciting stuff. I cannot wait to see all of this work in action. So maybe let's jump into the demo now, Florian.
Absolutely. Let me stop sharing and start sharing as well and refresh the screen just to make sure. And then you should be seeing my browser any minute. All righty. Hope you're able to see.
Yes. Perfect.
Awesome. All righty. So this is a work zone, another work zone demo environment. And here's an example of, again, my workspace similar to what Yumna has shown just some minutes ago. And let's say I want to add a card here to this page experience. And this card doesn't exist yet. So in this case, I actually have to build it. So let's wait for my Business Application Studio to be up and running. And then what I'll do is I'll basically start creating a simple card from the template and then deploy it to work zone and make use of it all in one go, basically. So as I've shown on the slides, what you would do is you would, in Business Application Studio, as indicated on the slides, you would have already created a development space with the work zone developer tools or the work zone tools extension enabled, done that in preparation for this demo here. And then when I create a project from a template, you can see there's different types of work zone specific entities or part of the extension tool that you can use. For instance, a workspace template, or that's what we're going to use today here, a simple UI integration card. So I'm going to select that one and go ahead. Then I can say exciting demo, whatever we want here, and then subtitle. And so you can provide some general metadata for the project itself. And you can also decide whether or not you want to make this card compatible with mobile cards. So then it would basically be available in addition to in Workzone itself, it would also be available in the mobile cards app. For now, we skip this to keep it simple, but you can of course do that. And then if I hit finish, I should be presented with this card experience in just a second. There you go. So it's right here. And let's close this other example here. And what we already have here is basically the manifest JSON that I was talking about just a minute ago. And this is now, of course, basically a rather simple example of the card. In this case, it's visualizing just the code. And what you can, of course, do is, for instance, do the preview. So you can see here there's different options. And you can, for instance, also use the UI integration card preview option. And this will immediately show what the card would look like or will look like once you add it to Workzone. So this is one option that you have already in Business Application Studio, and it will go a long way. You can, of course, choose to enable or disable auto preview or not. Those are different settings available in the context menu of Business Application Studio. If you do a lot of development, you don't want to do constant refresh, of course. But for this sake of the demo here, it's nice to have this little demo here. And you can, of course, also do different other elements here. But essentially, as I've alluded to, we now have this card manifest JSON file, the preview, and we already are basically ready to go to get it up and running into Workzone. So as I said, it's really simple. And you can see here, you're now given two options in terms of the deployment, as I alluded to on the slide. You can either click package, which will generate a little zip archive you can download and upload into the Workzone administration console, which is of course an option. Or the more convenient way is you simply from here select deploy to Workzone. And essentially it's now gonna verify that this is now a new card. And of course, if you deploy an existing card, you will need to update it to a new version so that it will overwrite the same card. and replace it in all the instances where it's leveraged or used. But for now, we're good to continue. It's actually going to use a destination that I've already configured on the sub account to the content repository behind the scenes of WorkZone. And you can see here at the bottom right of the screen, the deployment was already successful. So technically now my card is ready to be used, technically at least for an administrator perspective, but it will not yet be available for my users. So let's take care of that part of the demo flow so that the card that I've now built, albeit a rather simple example of surfacing some data, let's make sure that my users can actually make use of it. And what I want to do for that is I want to go to the administration console of WorkZone. And you want to go to the UI integration cards area in particular. And what you'll note is that there's going to be a dedicated card here, some title, that sounds familiar. That's the card I've just deployed from the Business Application Studio. But as you can see right here, it is not yet active. So in order for my users to be able to use it, you need to activate it first. And right now, this is going to be a global action. So if I enable it now, basically every user in the system will be able to use it across their My Workspace. You can place it on different homepages as well as across all the workspaces. If you say there are certain scenarios where this card is only relevant or even should only be available to a certain subset of my users on WorkZone, you can also basically control where a card should be able to be used. And for that, you can basically, again, similar to the screen that was shown in the slides just a minute ago, you can also restrict the access to this individual card based on different scenarios. You can restrict it to the context of a dedicated chatbot, just to My Workspace. So then it's available just for every user in their My Workspace, but you cannot place it anywhere else. Or for the sake of this demo, of course, I'm going to leave it to unrestricted, but you can also basically say only in certain workspaces. So you could say, I have a manager workspace, and then all global leaders will be in that workspace. And that's where I want to place it because it shows, I don't know, manager tasks or manager to-dos. But in regular employee scenarios, this should not be shown. So this would be an example of using that. But for now, let's cancel out this. And you, of course, now have, of course, also different options of if the card, once the card is used, you can then also track where it's used because if you update a card, it will override, like I said, all instances of this card. So if I use this open SAP incidents card example, you can see here where used, it is actually used across 2 workspaces and a private workspace. So public and private. So there you can already have a good indication before deploying a new version of it. Well, what are the pages I would impact with this action? But for now, as we can see, I've activated this. Let's go back to My Workspace and complete the action, shall we? So I'll go into the edit mode again, as already nicely shown by Yumna just a minute ago. We have this grid-based page layout, the page building experience. Again, for the sake of this demo, I'm going to use the My Workspace. You can equally use the same card that I've just deployed across home pages and workspaces. And let's just add the card that I've just built using this catalog here. So we have the content finder. We have this very creative some title card. And what you can see, it's the card that I've just created. Let's maybe put some other things here, is now available. I can just hit publish and we're done. So this is now, in the sense of transparency, this is now, of course, some hard-coded data in the card itself. Just to reference that again, you'll find that here in the manifest JSON of the card itself. But as indicated on the slides or in the presentation flow earlier, this could now easily connect to a destination as well on BTP and then connect to SAP or third-party systems, basically any system you can connect to securely from a destination itself, and then make use of that in the card in the same way. But I think what we're hopefully able to see that it is extremely powerful on the one hand side and easy to do, that you start from a template, you build the card, deploy it to WorkZone, and you're ready to go in literally just a couple of minutes, at least for this simple example here. And I think we're almost reaching the bottom of the hour here. So I think I want to pause here and look if there's any questions in the chat that we would, of course, be more than happy to address.
Okay, the main question was whether it's available on free trial or free tier.
Okay, yeah, unfortunately today SAP WorkZone is not available on free tier or the trial landscape. This is of course something that we're looking into, but as of now we don't have that, unfortunately. Okay,
and if I go back, basically on my BTP tenant, I have like an instance of WorkZone, right?
Right.
It's basically a single instance of WorkZone for everybody, right? And then when I'm creating the card, I'm deploying essentially this application
Yes.
to BTP, and WorkZone is consuming this application. And then I have all the settings that you talked about.
Right. Yes, though you wouldn't necessarily deploy the card as an app to BTP itself. So in fact, it's more that you use, yes, WorkZone is a subscription on BTP, yes, and you would use Business Application Studio on that same sub account likely to do that. But then the card is actually deployed into the content repository directly in WorkZone. So it's not in the HTML5 repository on the managed app router, but it's rather directly within WorkZone. And from there it gets used. So it's using a dedicated content deployment destination connected to WorkZone that is made use of by the BAS experience here. Yeah. Which is maybe this is in addition to the ability, of course, to deploy apps using Business Application Studio into the HTML5 repo, which you can then also consume in WorkZone and Launchpad service. So this is basically an additional mechanism of integrating apps. Yeah.
Okay, and let's take the two personas. So Business Application Studio, I have developers who are using it. Rupam, I assume later today is going to talk more about more sophisticated things that developers can do in that area. Right. If I'm a business user who's not going to go into the code, am I still in Business Application Studio?
So as a business user, although the cards, of course, as shown, do have a low-code mechanism in the sense of this manifest JSON file that is more a declarative card and some configuration screen, I think normally this would not necessarily be a business user activity. So it's not necessarily, well, because everything outside of the simple declarative card, when you then talk about mapping to destinations, you wouldn't necessarily do this as a true business user. The business user has, on the other hand side, already a ton of capability in WorkZone itself. So the business user in WorkZone would more work with the cards provided to them by the developers, and then basically make use of those cards, place them alongside other content on the different pages of WorkZone, because that is truly a no-code experience. It's a drag and drop grid-like layer, no coding. And that's more the business user activity compared to building the card, which is traditionally more IT driven. Yeah.
Okay, so UI integration cards, building them, creating them, the task of a developer.
Yes,
right?
In general, especially when you talk about component cards, then it's essentially UI5 code. Yes.
Okay, and because you talked about, oh, I can just take something out of the box, like there are templates. Right, when you went through the whole template thing. So I thought maybe a business user might be able to take something out of the box. But you're saying, generally speaking, a developer is going to do this, make modifications, so forth.
Typically, yes. Which is, of course, not to say that a tech-interested or tech-savvy business user cannot do this. It's just that I think maybe we don't see it too often, but it's, of course, possible using templates.
And I can build a UI integration card that connects to the backend through a destination. And then when my user comes, I assume I could have principal propagation. So if it goes to a backend, it'll only bring back the data that they're supposed to see. That whole
yes, that's why it's so powerful that we can connect to the destination, so that it relies on ideally the individual user session and the context of the currently logged in user to propagate that identity to both cloud and on-premise backends via the different mechanisms, cloud connector, principal propagation. You mentioned that. Yeah, exactly. You don't want to use a technical user is what we're trying to say. You don't want to do that. Right. Yeah, it's a great news.
Yes, of course. Very good. Okay, I have no more questions. I don't see any more questions in the chat. So I guess I want to thank you for being here. That was really short and sweet, but I think people got the idea of the integration cards. Remind everybody that later on today, Rupam will come and delve even deeper into integration cards, and even after that, into other things that you can do with WorkZones with Business Application Studio. So thank you very much for coming and presenting.
Thanks all.
Thank you so much.